So, Crash 1. Decent, but not amazing. It was a good foundation for the rest of the series, but that's it. It was a good foundation. It doesn't really stand out from the rest of the series much aside from being the first game. But, as we all know, it was incredibly successful, so a sequel was in the cards immediately. Like, immediately. Apparently the game started development in October of 1996, which is just a month after the original game released. Aside from that tidbit, we don't know a whole lot about the game's production, but we can assume that the general idea for it was to make it bigger and better and fix some of the first game's more glaring issues. And so, Crash Bandicoot 2 was initially released on October 31st, 1997 for PlayStation. Like its predecessor, it was a critical and commercial smash hit. For anyone just joining in now, I'll be basing this review and the next one off the remade Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy versions. In comparison to Crash 1, the improvements made in the Insane Trilogy version of Crash 2 aren't quite as major, but they're still appreciated. I do know that some people still prefer the PlayStation 1 versions, which is still fine. If you think it makes the review invalid because it's based off the Insane Trilogy version, then go bake a cake about it. With that said, let's get into it. The storyline of Crash Bandicoot 2 picks up right after the original. After his defeat, Neo Cortex falls down to the land below and into a cavern. While in that cavern, Cortex discovers the power crystals, of course. Flash forward to 1 year after the events of Crash 1. Now in his space station, Cortex and his assistant, who is now the new character Dr. N-Jin, realize that the large crystal Cortex found in the cave is not enough to help them conquer the world, and they need 25 additional crystals to complete their plot. Cortex hatches a plan to easily get them all. Back on Earth, we see that Coco, another new character and Crash's sister, is asking Crash to find some batteries for her laptop to replace the ones that just died. In his little trek to get these batteries, Crash stumbles across a warp pad, which suddenly whisks him off to a strange room. Before he can discern what's going on, the room becomes filled with darkness and fog, and a strange holographic transmission from Cortex suddenly appears at the top of the room. It turns out that the oncoming alignment of the planet is going to cause utter calamity and destruction, so Cortex benevolently needs Crash's benevolent help to benevolently gather the crystals so he can benevolently stop this from occurring very benevolently. Yes, he tricks you at the end of the game. I like that they were trying to give the game an actual narrative this time around, but this plot is kind of ruined by the fact that what would have been its biggest twist is given away instantly. There is an attempt to make the player have this false trust for Cortex and have cryptic hints from Coco hijacking his transmission to warn Crash about what's really going on before he's cut off. But the game outright starts with Cortex explaining his true intentions, and for crying out loud, the game is called Cortex Strikes Back. It's made so obvious. As such, these mysterious moments have any impact or intrigue that they could have had completely dashed because you already know what's going on. It makes these moments feel utterly pointless. It's an ambitious idea for a Crash Bandicoot narrative, but it falls just a bit flat. Like the first game, Crash 2 and the Insane Trilogy looks stunning. We have the same detailed environments, sharp textures, fantastic models, great visual effects, and fluid animation of the prior remake. Nothing's really all too different in that regard. It was part of the same collection of remakes after all. The PlayStation 1 original is a very big improvement from Crash 1 on PS1. The models, animations, and effects have been upgraded heavily, and everything looks a lot more polished and refined for the hardware. Obviously it's dated, but the visuals are fantastic for the hardware it was made for and the time in which it was released. One thing Crash 2 definitely has over Crash 1 is thematic variety. In my review of Crash 1, I know that there sure were a lot of natural jungle and ruins type areas and a lot of mechanical industrial type areas without much else aside from the odd castle stage here and there. Crash 2 definitely does a much better job at aesthetics. We have more area types in general, and even some of the more reoccurring tropes don't always look identical in every level they pop up in. There are a few areas which show up just a bit too frequently for my tastes, like for example there's just a few too many snowy areas in this game, but as a whole there's a lot more unique areas in this game than in Crash 1. The music is also a whole lot better in Cortex Strikes Back. Crash 1's soundtrack was rather low energy and somewhat forgettable with a few exceptions. Crash 2's soundtrack kicks it into much higher gear than its predecessor. This game's set of tunes are much more energetic, catchy, and memorable. Everything fits the vibe of the levels, and it's just more enjoyable music in general. When a game's soundtrack managed to drill itself into my head from when I was literally a baby when I first played this, that's the mark of highly memorable video game music. The game's presentation has been highly improved from the first, from its aesthetics to its sound. But the best opportunity in a direct sequel like this is to improve the gameplay and mechanics, so let's see how Crash 2 handles this task. The basic moment-to-moment gameplay is pretty similar to the original game. Linear levels, destroying crates, everything you left from the original is still here and accounted for. Crash's moveset has been notably expanded from the original game. 3 new moves have been added to your basic moveset. By jumping and pressing the crouch button in the air, you can do a belly flop. This causes you to slam down to the ground quickly, which produces a shockwave that can defeat enemies, and additionally it's outright required to destroy locked crates, which won't break with a normal spin. Press the button while walking to slide. This can help you with going faster, especially when you spin right after it to extend your momentum, and is useful in just about any other way a slide would be useful. And finally, jumping during a slide lets you jump higher and farther. The latter two are incredibly fun additions that help make the game's pace faster. And the belly flop is there too, I guess. The game's structure has also been changed somewhat. Instead of 3 islands with a varying amount of levels on them each, we now have 5 warp rooms with 5 levels and a boss each, so 25 main levels in total. In each level, you must collect a crystal that serves as the stage's end goal. Getting to the warp pad without a crystal will boot you back to the warp room with no progress made. And of course, breaking every crate in the stage will net you a clear gem, something that now exists in each and every level. Bonus stages are now accessed just by entering the marked area instead of having to collect 3 tokens. Additionally, new death routes have been added. These extremely difficult but satisfying to complete mini levels must be reached without losing a single life beforehand. Like Crash 1's colored gems, because it's not the entire stage, it's a bit more palatable this time. Speaking of which, they fixed the colored gems! Instead of having to slog through an entire difficult level with no deaths, colored gems are more like hidden collectibles, and you simply have to find out how to obtain them. Can I just say, thank you God! For example, the blue gem is hidden in the game's first level, Turtle Woods. To obtain it, you have to go against how you usually play the game by completing the stage without destroying even a single crate. Or in Behaving, these nitro crates may seem hazardous, but they're actually fake ones that are safe to stand on and have an invisible warp pad on them that leads to a mini level where the purple gem lies. This is a far, far better way to handle colored gems. By making them tied to secrets, discovering them is interesting and exciting, and these things are finally fun to collect. Good time too, cause you've gotta collect all of them to get the game's best ending. The stages themselves have also gotten some new mechanics as well. For example, in the stages Digging and Behaving, Crash can dig in certain parts of land. This makes sense cause digging is a thing that real bandicoots in the real world can do. I bet they do it a whole lot more often than spinning around in circles as self-defense, but I'm obviously not a bandicoot expert as you can tell. Additionally, this is the first game in the series to let you use vehicles, just 2 in this game though. The first is the Jetboard, which appears in levels like Hang 8, Plant Food, and Air Crash. The camera changes to a top-down perspective, and you can traverse large paths of water that you wouldn't be able to normally at a much faster speed to boot. You can also perform tricks off ramps. These sections are brief but pretty fun. This addition is welcome in my book. And then there's the Jetpack. Wow, that's cool! Flying around at high speeds in outer space, the music's awesome, it's great, right? It would be if it didn't control this bad. Seriously, this thing is finicky to its core, and it's so floaty. I know we're in outer space, but does this game really need realistic physics? Really? What could have been a fun diversion is ruined completely by poor controls. This is probably the thing you hear people complain about the most in reviews of this game. Also, the hog riding levels from the original are back in spirit here. Instead, you're riding a teeny tiny little polar bear. They're a bit more fun here as the timing's less strict. 2 out of 3 of the alternate gameplay styles are fun, not bad. Even then, there's only 2 jetpack levels in the whole game, so it's only a brief lowlight on your playthrough. The game is still focused primarily on that solid platforming. The game is a whole lot less frustrating this time around. It's not extremely easy or anything, there is challenge here, but it's the right amount. It's not crushing like Crash 1 was, and that's an improvement. It's the perfect amount of balanced challenge, and as such, along with the various other additions and gameplay improvements, the game is a lot more fun to go through than its predecessor. It's more varied, more balanced, faster paced, and a lot more refined than its predecessor. I do have an issue with how way too many secrets are hidden behind backtracking, which isn't all too fun, but that's about it. This is a highly improved follow-up. Overall, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back is a massively improved game that utterly blows Crash 1 out of the water. A lot of the original issues have been ironed out, resulting in an overall more enjoyable game. The locales and platforming are far more varied, the gameplay is way faster paced, and the difficulty is more balanced and less frustrating. It's overall a more polished and refined game than its predecessor. It may have dropped the ball with its interesting plot concept and have a couple bad levels here and there, but despite that, Crash 2 is a very enjoyable, highly improved sequel that still holds up even after this long. So that's why I'm awarding Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back a 9 out of 10 and a Silver Award. A great next step for the series for sure. So that was my review of Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. A sequel I adore and think is better than the original in every way. This review was very special to me specifically, as this was the very first video game I ever played, like ever, so I hold it very near and dear to my heart. That could have possibly put a bit of a nostalgic bias on my outlook on the game, but I still hope you enjoyed the review anyway. Next time on the Crash Bandicoot Retrospective, we'll be taking a look at the final game in the Sane Trilogy as we take a look at the fan favorite Crash Bandicoot Warped. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, commenting to tell me what you thought about it, and subscribing to be notified of future uploads. But until we meet again, this has been blueblur98 signing off. See you next time as we travel through time.